That's how all of us got thrown into this world. It's a sight that has greeted me countless times over almost 6 years of playing this game. Saying that now, it almost doesn't feel real, as does the upcoming release of Nahida. Before the last of the Archon-based regions releases, I felt the need to make a video like this, telling the story of my time playing this game, and how that shaped my expectations and hopes for Nahida. So, let's start from where it all began. A small beach near Mondstadt. Genshin back then was just different. There are multiple factors for it, but I can safely say COVID played a huge part in it. Most people were stuck at home, often bored out of their minds. Genshin provided me and my friends something to talk about and play together. I fondly remember going through all of Mondstadt, exploring every nook and crevice I could find. Though I must not have explored that well, considering I recently found a random common chest while meandering in the area. One humorous thing did happen to me at the time though. I had picked Lumine for my protagonist over Ether because I had watched the one trailer where Lumine was being shown, which made me think she was a canon protagonist. We'll just call this a happy little accident. Speaking of canon itself, the Archon quest was also done well for an introduction into Bat. It didn't overwhelm the players with a billion terms and had a relatively simple plot. Obviously, it could have been done in a more grandiose manner, but I think it did its job. It set up interesting conflicts for the future, such as that with the Abyss Twin and Signora, and gave us a foothold in this strange new world. This could be me with rose-tinted glasses, but I still think that Mondstadt was one of the better Archon quests to date. I do wish that Genshin, or Genshin, meaning original god as a term, was properly introduced in the English dub. If you listen to the Chinese version, you'll know that Venti name drops the game at the end of the Archon quest, something that isn't done in the English version. Instead, he uses the word allogenes to describe vision wielders, but the game's title has never really been properly explained to those only playing in the English version of the game. To me, Mondstadt really set the tone for the game overall, with a genre being that of medieval fantasy effectively, something that becomes a bit more contentious as the game expands into future patches. Either way, I was enamored with the game. It was, and still is, fun and was a getaway from the troubles and circumstances of the COVID months. If I had any complaints at the time, it was with the Crucible event. At that time, events cost resin, and was a forced co-op mode. The netcode for Genshin has always been bad. Players rubber banding, random damage numbers appearing on screen, desync, etc. This particular event has left such a bad experience that I generally don't open up to co-op anymore because of it. Though it's also the reason why I'll never consider future events to be worse. This was pretty much the bottom of the barrel. Frankly, I didn't realize that I entered Liyue at the time. I was just meandering around, trying to get rid of the aftertaste of the Crucible from my mind. Once I touched the Archon statue, I got introduced to the most intricate kit ever to optimize, GOMC. This is when I really got interested in the combat system of Genshin. Prior to this, I had barely leveled my talents, only discovering the ability to do so in Stormterror's lair. Figuring out how GMC's kit worked, getting better at boulder flicks, star stab, and maximizing boulder damage. Those are fun times. It's like finding out a new side to something you already enjoyed, and gained a new way to appreciate it. I also enjoyed Liyue's exploration far more than Mondstadt's. I know. Liyue's exploration is filled with tedious sections where you're spamming the jump key to scale the numerous cliffs, or slow tapping your movement keys just to get to that ledge above you at low stamina and then falling despite your best efforts. Despite the lack of quality of life in this exploration loop, to me it felt like exploring. Even if there wasn't anything at the top of the mountain you just scaled, you were greeted with a glorious view of the landscape. That essence of exploration really drew me in. It's such a simple thing, but it's hard to get right. What enhanced the experience further were the things you could run into as a result of getting to the top of these mountains. Before Treasure Room Seals, Liyue had a prototype version in the Chi of Your quest. One of the things that stood out to me with this quest was that you were passively progressing it by exploring. Randomly stumbling upon a site that gave you one of the necessary key fragments led you to asking a village elder, which then directed you towards the sites of the other two fragments and a loose location of where you'd need to use them. The main thing, and I think this is something Genshin has forgotten nowadays, is that you weren't punished for doing things your way. You could choose not to seek out the village elder and just explore the world and stumble upon the fragment locations yourself. Nothing was directly locked behind the quest, besides the vault needing 3 fragments. And even if you did ask the village elder, you were only given hints about the location of the other fragments, not exactly where they were. The entire time you were put in the driver's seat, without interference from anything else. There's also a hint of suspense when doing this quest, as you have no clue what would be behind the gate. Treasure? A boss fight? Something else? That kind of feeling was truly magical at the time. After having my fill of exploration, I eventually set my sights back on the Arcane quest. The most striking thing I remember was the abrupt end to it in 1.0. Ganyu had just come to tell us to go to the Jade Chamber and then... nothing. No prompt, no end of quest, just nothing. It was really confusing to me, so much so that I looked up online how to continue the Arcane quest because I thought my game was potentially bugged. Eventually, the rest of the Arcane quest was released once more patches came out, and to be frank, it was a bit of a mixed bag. I didn't particularly like how many fetch quests needed to be done in the middle part of the story, but the quest got better near the end. Fighting Child was great. Traveler actively using 2 elements at the same time gave me hope that maybe we'd be able to mix and match elemental combinations in actual gameplay, which has not come to fruition. The battle on the Jade Chamber felt hectic, especially with the banger soundtrack in the background. It also helped that my characters weren't particularly strong, so each fight felt like a fight, instead of something just one-sided. Following the completion of the Arcane quest, I spent time exploring the Dragon Spine expansion to Genshin's map, along with various minor events that occurred at the time. I don't have any strong memories associated with those events in particular, just one regret. There was an Oceanid event at the time, which allowed you to get an Oceanid pet. At the time, I was too busy to finish the event in full, which is why I never managed to get Endora, which is a damn shame. As for the major events, I thought the Dragonspine event was well made. Dragonspine was really fun to explore and was honestly the first time the map itself had any real verticality to it. I know Liyue had a bunch of mountains and cliffs, but there weren't really any caves or other underlying structures to it. Dragonspine had that and other things I found comedic, like the icicles falling on you from above that could chain freeze you. The snowy area has been more on my mind recently, likely due to Nahida's upcoming release. I just hope there aren't any global aiming issues once we get there. There was also the first Golden Apple Archipelago. It still boggles my mind that this and the following Golden Apple Archipelago were temporary maps. It honestly created quite a bit of FOMO at the time, since there's a sense of urgency due to the map being temporary. I enjoyed the carefree and whimsical atmosphere both versions brought, when exploring of course, and not worrying about can I finish this map in time or not. It really felt different compared to the rest of the game at the time, and brought home that summer vacation environment. I just wish it was permanent. And then of course, we had the prologue to Inazuma's Arcane quest. Kazuha has been by and large one of my favorite characters in the main story. More so that he has a really fully fleshed out story, but it's not really due to the Arcane quest. Like, the Arcane quest kind of goes through it performatively, but the thing is that in reality, the events that took place in 2.6 and 2.8 with the Golden Archipelago and the Iridori Festival, which were both more impactful to his overall story than anything in the actual Arcane quest / main story. But that's another note. We'll talk about that later. Of course, I had read about the Sakoku Decree and how it affected citizens in Inazuma, but this is one of the first times that a character spoke of their first-hand account, along with what was driving him, a rekindling of a dead vision. With that prelude, I was hyped for Inazuma. It seemed to have a plethora of potential story routes it could go, and the first act of the story started off strong. To be honest, I was half expecting Ayaka to be written as an anti-hero in some manner, with the way she was introduced and how she used the victims of the Vision Hunt Decree to convince Traveler to help when they initially didn't want to. She seemed cunning. Her background also supported this, with her heading a major political faction at a young age after her parents had died. And then, of course, we went straight into the dating sim with her dancing in a river with socks and sandals. I wasn't a huge fan of these forced inclusion of story quests for Inazuma. It detracted quite a bit from the focus of the Arcane quest. I know themes of eternity were brought up in both and explored during them, but it didn't make it any less awkward because you couldn't progress the Arcane quests without doing both of them. And, well, okay, let's be fair, it seemed to be more motivated by greed rather than story purposes since both characters were on the banner at the time. Getting past to the second act, I liked it a lot. This is honestly the last time I remember Genshin having a boss fight that felt losable. The Electro Archon was intimidating, and it felt like a legitimate threat. You could also easily lose this fight and have to redo it. Using gameplay to invoke emotions in an audience is what makes video games different from other types of media, and I felt that this part of Inazuma executed on this well. Afterwards, having to travel through war-torn areas and disaster wrought upon by the resistance and the Shogun's army was excellent environmental storytelling. The result of constant fighting often brings consequences on unrelated parties, and that was evident by all the disasters on Konosuba and Yashiori Island. I especially liked the world quest on Yashiori Island, where you had to repair these wards to stop the endless lightning. If you read any of the logs near these ward locations, you'll find that the resistance destroyed them in order to slow down the Shogun's army, despite not getting permission to do so from Kokomi. For me, this was one of the better world quest inclusions that held significant implications towards the main quest. Depending on how it was written, the main story could host multiple factions within the resistance itself,
with the more radical factions doing whatever they can to beat the Shogun's army,
even if it meant sacrificing the very ideals they should be protecting. I still think to this day that how closely aligned this world quest is with the main story is the best Genshin's done with world quests as a whole and their relationship to the main story. The quest isn't overly long, all the information is readily available there, and has direct references to what is happening in-game at that intended moment in time. To clarify, not all world quests need to do this. However, I do expect a balance of sorts. Most future world quests just don't do it for me in the same way, and I'll talk about that in later sections of the video. This is pretty much where the praise ends for the Inazuma Archon quest though. I can't begin to explain how badly this ending was botched, at least from my perspective. I guess let me begin with one of the more humorous complaints. One of the driving motivations of Traveler to commit a reckless action in storming the Fatui Delusion Factory was Teppei dying. Except the game doesn't properly illustrate that he's dead. When you go to prompt him, all it says is that his breathing is getting weaker, not that his body is limp and cold. However, the quest description says that Teppei is dead. I distinctly remember one of my friends telling me that he didn't realize Teppei was dead at all because of this, and I can't imagine that he was the only one that didn't realize. The whole resistance portion was also just kind of written poorly. Remember how I was hoping for several factions in the resistance? That was kind of there with how parts of the resistance were utilizing delusions, but it just made Goro and by extension Kokomi look absolutely incompetent. This, in conjunction with how little time we spent with the resistance, resulted in really rushed writing. Remember Teppei from earlier? We had less than an hour of screen time with him to then motivate our angered rush towards the Fatui Delusion Factory. I don't know about you, but his writing wasn't nearly charismatic enough for me to get that mad over it. Afterwards, things start accelerating towards the climax. Signora boss fight was more creative than previous ones had been. I wish the cocoon portion of the fight was a bit more dynamic and hectic, but aside from that, it wasn't bad. Raiden eliminating her on the spot was something I appreciated at the time, since I thought that meant we'd see more permanent consequences for potential characters going forward. I don't think that's really been happening, but you know, it is what it is.
Cosmo blocking Raiden's ultimate was really cool, but in terms of the story arc, it's not actually that great, because all you get is the intro where he's really sad that his friend died, and then now all of a sudden he's just able to just whip it out and use his friend's vision. Like, don't get me wrong, the motivation is there, the bones are there, the explanation's there, but we don't really see the arc. It was just a start and an end. There's no middle, there's no development, there's nothing. And honestly, that's kind of a lot of what Inazuma's story quest was.
The ending of the Sakoku Decree, negotiations between the Raiden and Resistance, all of that and more was not placed in the Archon quest, but instead character story quests. I remember being pretty livid over this, as this is necessary closure for the Archon quest, but rather than placing it there with another act, instead it was placed in character stories, which I thought was a poor choice. This treatment of the main story really left a sour taste in my mouth, and to this day, it hasn't left completely. Regardless of how good your world building is, if the main story isn't written well, I'm not going to be interested in poring over countless texts and quests to really get to know the environment better, because the payoff for all that effort wasn't there. I think this is because of the gacha nature of Genshin. Stories can't be written with the freedom that is required to make them really good, since they want to highlight whatever character is on banner. I do wonder at times how different Genshin's story would be if it wasn't a gacha game, or maybe if they just didn't adhere to the traditional gacha ways. This is when I started getting into YouTube. Part of the reason I started my channel was that I wanted a new way to enjoy the game. I wasn't satisfied with normally playing the game anymore. No, I didn't really start getting serious until after the end of the Inazuma Conquest. Additionally, new content was stalled for a period due to a COVID outbreak in Shanghai. This is where the 240-day Ayaka banner meme came from for those watching that started playing Genshin at a later date. With the content dropped present, I focused on building up my channel. In the beginning, I had focused on Abyss challenges / guides, mainly surrounding GOMC. Looking back at the gameplay, I can confidently say that I sucked. I'd also done other challenges, like getting the max fishing achievement in a couple of days, when fishing was first released. Many of my video ideas hadn't panned out at the time, and growth was relatively stagnant. That was when I had stumbled across one of Jabba the Hutt's videos on Swords Only. This series inspired me to start my own version with Callists. I figured that with my combat experience at the time, I could do a unique take on something like this. Of course, many other aspiring creators were doing the same. Quite a few series of Only designation took off around this time period, including mine. The Catalyst Only and eventually Shield Only videos really helped put my account on the map, so to say. So much so that I started neglecting my main account. Back then and now, I had limited time to actually play video games. Having to divide my time between multiple accounts meant that I really couldn't focus much on either of them to a good degree, which resulted in Sumeru being left largely unexplored. Not to mention time that was, well, now spent on editing instead of playing the game. It was sustainable during the period of slow updates from the dev team due to the COVID outbreak, not so much once that had been resolved and Sumeru got released. While I cited earlier that my YouTube channel was actively taking time away from my main account, that's not the only reason why my time commitment was slipping. A large point of frustration of Sumeru was how so many things in random places were locked behind quests, seemingly for no good reason gameplay-wise other than to pad out runtime. In the forest, you had these points that could only be unlocked by learning the necessary song from the Aranara, who are a part of a world quest so horrendously long, many people refuse to do it out of principle. Don't even get me started with the 70+ Aranara that you had to collect, some of which had additional fetch quests alongside them. To be frank, some of those fetch quests were fine, because you could make progress on them independent of the Aranara quest, such as these growth puzzles, which is, I think, how things like this should be. The desert was honestly just as bad to me. To even begin exploring the numerous pyramids, you had to progress through the world quest with Jet, and while I did like the story with Jet herself, I didn't like being forced through a linear pathing to be able to properly access exploration sites. It just goes against the core of an open world game to me. I also wasn't able to spend the time to finish the whole thing due to how long the quest was overall. These quests are also very loosely linked to the Conquest narrative in Sumeru, something I really didn't like. I felt like the devs were starting to not properly respect players' time, and given that I was beginning to transition from college to graduate school, it didn't make me particularly happy. This is why I didn't interact with these quests for a fairly long time. That's the thing. Even though these aspects of the game didn't suit my taste, I could just choose not to interact with them. I think that's something those vocal about the game's state often forget. Genshin has many different aspects to it. You can choose to interact with the things you want to while ignoring others. Though, to be fair, the allure of Primogems can often outweigh that.
Outside of the issues I had with exploration,
I felt Sumeru was overall good. Dendro was a neat addition to the existing line of elements, and really allowed some characters to show off their powers, Kuki, Toma, and Keqing being among them. This was also the start of the yearly official buff. To this day, I don't get how this character can get this much power, but, you know, that's the power of delusion, I guess. As for the Archon quest, I still find Sumeru's Archon quest to be the best out of the current regions released. The pacing is fairly consistent, and the Samsara cycle was interesting, and I felt like it gave me agency even though the story doesn't give you choices early to get out of the cycle. This is because I was preoccupied with creating my own theories about what was going on. The game didn't make me feel trapped since there was something to do, to actively think about. It there was a way to end cycles early by finding Liyue, it'd been even better, but I don't think that was possible. Correct me in the comments if that wasn't true. The introduction of Dendra was also when things started to look up for my Catalyst account. Having a decent second team wasn't something I had access to until I got Nahida. Once that happened, along with getting access to another Hydro character in Mona, it felt like I could make a breakthrough in 36 starring Abyss. Even though I had done some Abyss related challenges prior to this one, I felt like this was an overall step up from the stuff I was used to, and it felt euphoric when I did manage to clear.
Yes, let's go! Oh my god!
However, euphoria wouldn't last long. Spontaneous was when things became truly untenable for me. With how Genshin had progressively added longer and longer quests and exploration loops, plus things ramping up for me IRL, I no longer had time to take care of 3 separate Genshin accounts. I was also getting bored on playing on them after managing the 36-star Abyss. Sure, it's nice to keep 36-starring, but when does it end at that point? Yes, we have Stygian and IT now, but there was little to no indication that we'd ever get another endgame mode. As a result, I ended up abandoning those accounts, and haven't been on them since. To this day, I still don't have the time it would require to play multiple accounts, make videos, and survive in graduate school. I already stretched fairly thin making videos and playing on the one account to begin with. Still, I had fun making characters considered to be of a lower power in the meta community work, and Shingen being the first of the characters I made videos in this style with. However, this combat focus took away time from other places in my Genshin experience. I didn't have much of a chance to play through as much of Fontaine as I wanted, at least prior to when I was still running both the Catalyst and Shield only accounts. Still, the parts I did play though, I largely enjoyed. First acts of the Arcane quest were a nice introduction to the region. Getting access to a swimming/dive mechanic was really cool, and the underwater sites were breathtaking. Sometimes I forget that this is a free game. Fontaine's exploration was also not as frustrating as Sumeru's was overall for me. Sure, there were still areas locked out by specific quest progress, but at least there weren't random points on the map that required some song from a bunch of mushrooms, or at least I don't recall one. Largely due to time constraints, I didn't play through the world quests on Fontaine all the way through until much later. I don't know if I would have enjoyed these quests more had I had the time to play all the way through them, but I definitely felt like they were a slog to go through at the time, and the presentation was so dry, it made Hardhack look like it had moisture. This issue also extended to the middle acts of the Arcane quest where we were placed in prison. If the intention was to make us feel trapped in the quest, and by extension feel like we were in jail, they definitely succeeded in that. Unfortunately, that's not conducive to giving me a good experience, and I definitely remember Alt F4ing in the middle of the quest out of sheer boredom. To be fair, with Farina and Nervalet in the ending act, there was a significant emotional payoff. It was really good, but the pacing of the overall quest had me place Fontaine in the second place behind the Sumeru story, whereas remained since. The one thing I haven't mentioned yet is the travesty of Hydra MC.
You ever hear the tragedy of
Hydra MC.
The first is literally. Oh.
I personally think that this is currently the worst kit in the game, and it's not even close. For other contenders of the position, at least they have support of utility that is unique and could fill some kind of niche, even if it doesn't work much now. Hydra MC's design process honestly needs to be studied. I don't understand how you can make a kit this bad after 3 years of the game's release leading up to this point. To illustrate how terrible this kit is, the devs had to splice a part of another character's kit in Ino to give to Hydra MC in the main story of Krai to make them usable in triggering lunar reactions off-field. Granted, all the lunar characters that were paired with Hydra MC were mostly on-field DPS characters, so I get why they had to do it, but it certainly doesn't help with the slander this character received. Though I guess Hydra MC did have their fun in the sun with the lantern interaction, which is still possible with Bloom cores to this day. I haven't said it directly yet, so I'll say it now. While it was certainly true that a large contributor to the lack of playing through Genshin was an IRL time issue and, certain parts of quests being long and whatnot, there was also just a part of me that felt burnt out. At this point, I had been actively playing the game daily for almost 3 years, something I hadn't done with any other video game prior to this. It was almost inevitable that the passion I had for the game would slowly fade away, which is ironic since one of the underlying plot threads in Genshin is about erosion and how that affects long-lived entities. given that I'm still here today, something had reignited my passion, or at least gave it a new form. I can say for a fact that Dragon Strike was something that kept me interested in actively playing the game, committing multiple weeks to the technique with Traveler. I knew about Dragon Strike in 1.0, but it always felt like something out of my reach. I didn't have Diluc, the premier Dragon Strike character, and I didn't have a high opinion of my abilities to play video games. I've tried to get high on ranked ladders before for some video games, but I was never particularly good. So given this, why did I feel compelled to even try Dragon Striking to begin with? I think it was just the concept of it. I was burnt out in the closed sandbox the devs intended you to live in. I felt that to get enjoyment out of the game, I had to find some way to press the envelope and get out of that sandbox. Dragon Strike represented that for me, and so even though I didn't feel like I would have the skills for it, I tried anyway. I remember the first time I tried a Dragon Strike with MC without movement speed. I had tried for nearly half an hour before I got one successful Dragon Strike on a tree in the grove near the Favonius headquarters. It was euphoric, to be honest. That kind of practice continued on. I don't think it had to be Dragon Strike. I think anything that would have given me a long-term goal, a reason to keep playing, doing fun things would have sufficed. This is just the path I chose, and I must say, it's produced a lot of results. This descent into Dragon Strike madness unlocked a whole new world for me when it came to combat. I wanted to further push the envelope and keep ascending to higher heights. And that's when I stumbled across Rue's channel. Rue is an insane abyss runner, using teams and strategies most would be unable to come close to replicating or creating to begin with. That really inspired me to do something I was curious to try and accomplish for a while. 36-star Spiral Abyss using only 1% or less usage rate characters. This concept was something I thought of for a while, actually since the beginning of Fontaine. Part of me being burnt out at the time was because I had made multiple attempts in previous Abyss cycles to carry out this concept and couldn't manage to do it. There were less characters in the game at the time, so often the list that could be used wasn't synergistic enough to take on what was present in the cycle. Seeing Rue's clears made me realize that that excuse could only take me so far. His runs are beautiful. Piece of art. I had thought that I was reaching the ceiling with regards to how good I could play, but seeing his and other clears in the community showed me a whole new side of the game's systems. So, I went back to the drawing board for that clear idea, trying different strategies and things I hadn't explored enough, like a support Lisa. Things also came full circle when I decided on using a main DPS Xingyan, the first character I made work outside of Traveler when it came to off-meta clears. Looking back on it, a lot of things built up piece by piece to make the clear possible. All the Traveler videos I did in the same cycle in preparation for PMC's full release, the weapon I had originally gone for Noelle and then gotten an accidental copy of when whirling for 4-star weapons, the active practicing of Dragon Strike which sharpened my reflexes in general. That feeling when all the things you've done up to this point were not for naught is pure euphoria.
Yes! Yes! Let's go! Oh my god!
This also extended to Furu's Abyss tournament I participated in. Those weeks of doing Abyss clears on top of making the many infographics that were necessary for the round reviews, which let's be real, they were not good, because I made them. But that was some of the most fun I've had in the game. I also had the opportunity to cast on the round summaries, which felt unique. To be frank, I was pretty anxious prior to participating. Quite a few of the people partaking in the tournament were better in the game than me, and I had that dumbass idea of using every Traveler in the tournament. Yes, including Hydro. I was pretty convinced from the get-go that I wouldn't place very highly, in part due to my placement in the first round. Starting off nearly dead last isn't great. Still, I suppose that's what you get when you insist on using one of the worst characters in the game. Look, I'm a Traveler mate. I have the right to drag Hydro MC's name through the mud and back as long as I keep using them. Despite the rough start, I was one of the last reigning participants in the tournament by the end. I got to use a lot of different characters and synergies that I hadn't before, and it really brought home how much I enjoy the combat of this game when it isn't so heavily tied to a timer. While most of the teams I used aren't able to get 36 stars in Abyss as a whole, just messing about with a sandbox in such a manner is a unique experience and is something that I wouldn't have felt had I not participated in the tournament. So I do have Furu and his server to thank for that. Unfortunately, some dark clouds loomed over the horizon when it came to combat at this time that would set the trend going forward. During this time period, Natlan had already been released. While I've been writing this script, I've tried to figure out how I felt about the region as a whole, and honestly, the only accurate word I can use is forgettable. I don't think the region itself was particularly good or bad, and I was reactionary back then, but it didn't give me any lasting impact overall when I think about it now. Minus one exception, which I'll talk about in a bit. I know there were really important lower notes in Natlan about major events in Tibet's history, such as regarding the War of Funerary Flame, but it didn't really interest me at the time. Mainly because I had yet to really get invested in the lore of Genshin again. The combat of the game was my primary focus, and was enough to keep me sated, especially given the amount of time I spent on resetting was quite significant. The only thing that I remember strongly about the story was the introduction of Traveler's spaceship. I know there was some kind of beta cutscene depicting this at some point, unless I've been misinformed. However, the way it was introduced in the story was just too sudden, and reflected a turning point of the genre of the game. We could expect more sci-fi technology to be involved in future patches of the game, something vastly different than the humble beginnings of Mondstadt. I don't necessarily have a problem with this genre change itself, but the introduction definitely needed some work, and this is probably why I have a negative opinion of introducing sci-fi technology as a whole. I do regret not paying more attention to Natlan's lore in general. Aside from it being referenced significantly in the main story nowadays, I think it would be something that I would have been interested in back in, 1.0 days, basically. Getting an understanding of what Tibet was like prior to the Heavenly Principles arriving would give context into why the things are the way they are now. I'm looking into this more currently with whatever free time I have left, though, so if anyone wants to recommend any resources on that era of Tibet, let me know in the comment section down below, and I'll look into it. I'll have to start somewhere with getting a handle on the lore, given that I have not been heavily invested since Inazuma, basically. The things I did focus on in Natlan's time were the trends of combat, mainly the power creep. You could argue when power creep really started to happen, but I think it's fair to say that when Stygian Onslaught got introduced, things really started to ramp up. Prior to Stygian, you'd only really need 60k DPS teams to 36-star Abyss, 80k or more if you wanted to do it comfortably. It's actually kind of weird to talk about DPS terms to describe combat prior to Stygian, because I really didn't think about it back then. I still maintain to this day that the Krai Automaton is one of the single worst enemies in this game. It's not because it was hard or anything like that, it's because it didn't do anything. You see, the way you're intended to defeat this boss is by applying enough cryo so that it freezes up. If you don't use cryo whatsoever, it's, for all intents and purposes, impossible to defeat unless you have very specific units and a ton of damage. So you are pretty much forced to use cryo to defeat it. But with cryo, the boss just sits there like a damage dummy while you wail at it until it unfreezes itself, then attacks you twice or maybe thrice, and then bam, same exact pattern again. I kid you not, a lot of enemies are like this now, where they have no real patterns behind them, and it feels like fighting something static. And even when they do have attacks, they often don't do enough damage to kill through the significant shield and healing increases characters have been getting over the years. This introduction of Stygian also opened a whole new can of worms when it came to assessing characters. People who were initially judging characters based on their ability to do Spiral Abyss now use the standard of Fearless difficulty in Stygian, and that bar is significantly higher now. This diminished Abyss runners, which I find to be a damn shame given that I find Abyss runs on the whole more impressive than Stygian runs when comparing on an apples to apples basis. When I say this, I mean comparing an Abyss run with teams barely meeting the DPS threshold to Stygian runs with teams barely meeting the DPS threshold. This trend unfortunately continued into non-Krai and was exacerbated by the introduction of the Wild Hunt. making it so that units that had already significantly higher DPS than the rest of the cast could easily dispatch these enemies while making it at least 2 times harder for the rest of the cast to defeat them is crazy work. And I know at least several players who lost interest in the combat of this game after these worrying signs.
While it's not likely, I sincerely hope the devs don't continue the trend of power creep to this extent in Snezhnaya. I honestly, if it does happen that way, I'm gonna need another way to enjoy the combat in this game, because the power creeps are getting to a point where it doesn't feel great.
Still, Krai wasn't all bad. In fact, I'd say outside of combat, Krai really elevated Genshin as a whole. Prior to Krai, generally the child characters of the game didn't hold much power or position in the actual story, and were largely played off as joke characters, with the only exceptions to this being Nahida, the Dendro Archon, and Eon-san, who was one of the 6 warriors with inherited names important to Mabuika's plans. So with Aino being the leader of a legitimate faction in Krai while still having childlike traits was honestly a breath of fresh air with regards to the story. Additionally, Krai was attempting the challenge of including various lore nodes scattered throughout Tibet, and properly including them in the main story. In my case, it has revived my interest in the lore of Tibet's world, something that hasn't been the case since Inazuma, basically. Exploration was also more in the forefront of my mind now that I had more time than prior years. Becoming more efficient at editing and streamlining my overall process made it so that I could spend that free time playing the game. Plus, it also helped that I didn't have 3 accounts to maintain anymore. However, Genshin's exploration near the beginning and middle of Krai's patch cycle was overly simplified, and honestly felt too easy. The enhanced compass contributed to this, but I didn't mind its existence. After all, I could just choose not to use it. Why prevent those that would appreciate the quality of life from having it just because of my preferences? So I decided to do exploration challenges, eventually getting to the point where I fully covered the in-game map and had to draw my own to figure out where I was going. This honestly revived my appreciation for exploration. One of the main results that came from having to draw my own map was that I spent more time looking at the various views and vistas to see in Krai. It evoked a feeling that I hadn't felt since Fontaine to the same degree. Breathtaking. I do have a gripe with the treasure vaults every region since Natlan has had. There isn't that sense of wonder when unlocking them anymore. You know exactly what you're going to get. And the way to get them is also just RNG. There's not really any particular link to a site or an important place in the world, like the She of Your quest was. In Natlan, at least they were tied to each tribe's location for the most part, so, you know, it kind of makes sense, but the implementation in Krai isn't as well motivated. They were kind of just placed randomly, which I hope changes going forward to be more like the She of Your quest in Liyue. It took nearly 4 years to get to this point, but I had finally regained my passion towards Genshin in the areas I originally had them at. Granted, I did have complaints on certain aspects of the story, like Sandrone's revival feeling like a cop-out, and later parts of Krai's Archon quest, or I should say Sumeru's Archon quest technically, not feeling that well written. Still, having that sense of wonder back even after playing this game for so long feels freeing and great. There's certainly more to my experience than the things I mentioned. 6 years worth of memories and feelings can't be fully articulated in a video of this length.
What? What the f is that? Yo! Let's go!
But despite that, I hope I've been able to convey my overall views of this game. I might get busier IRL, so we'll see how much I can actively enjoy Snezhnaya. Genshin has been a home away from home for me, so I doubt I'll stay away for too long. Regarding my experiences, I honestly wrote more than I initially planned to. There's just so much to write, you know? Many feelings and thoughts overflowed as I put pen to page, or, well, keyboard to Google Doc. There's one feeling that presided over everything though. Fun. Well, I may be a content creator and have more motivation to keep playing Genshin than just enjoying it. At the end of the day, it's a video game. They're meant to be fun. That's the most important thing when it comes to a game. Others will always have their opinion on things and how they perceive you should feel about it. But at the end of the day, all that matters when playing a video game is having fun. in whatever manner you have fun with the game. So with that, there is one thing I want to say to the people who've worked hard over the years to keep updating and running Genshin. Thank you for making this game. I've had so much fun over the years, and hope to continue in the patches to come. So while the land we're going to next has been labeled as cold and harsh, I feel warm inside, awaiting the things that are present there. If you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching. See you, Nahida.